As I travel around North America, and it doesn't matter which town I go to or which company I work for, there's always a competitor in the marketplace that's willing to give away their hard-earned money. It's a constant race to the bottom with people. And you know, I believe in quality, not quantity. So I take exception to this. I think as an industry, we have to constantly strive to build a better experience for the people that hire us. It's not about giving away your money and reducing services. It's about constantly being in search of excellence, looking for the very finest strategies you can apply to your business model so that your clients feel the experience of working with somebody that's exceptional. Now, you are going to be at a kitchen table, and the clients can be very direct. They will say things like, "Will you cut your commission?" And when that happens, often we feel like we've been attacked, and we immediately go into some sort of combative selling mode. Client says, "Will you cut your commission?" And the agent says, "Absolutely not." And you can feel the negative energy between yourself and the client, and it's pushing you further apart instead of closer together. Now, if somebody was to ask me, would I cut my commission, my response or my dialogue would be the same, but my delivery would be a little bit different. "Will you cut your commission?" And my answer to that would be, "No. Do you have any more questions?" You can see that I've answered the question, I've used the same dialogue, but my delivery is much softer. And it kind of throws them off beat a little bit. They were expecting some sort of combative position from me, and what did they get? They got this straightforward answer, but I had that little bit of a laugh in the back of my throat, kind of like I was, we handled it, but I was a little embarrassed that you even asked about that, to be honest with you. So let's try that one more time. "Will you cut your commission?" And my answer is no. "Do you have any more questions?" And you move right on as if it was normal. Now, sometimes people will stay after you and they won't let go of it. And you need to have more than one objection handling dialogue or technique that you're comfortable with in terms of communicating. You need to explain to them it's a risky business and that you have to invest all of your money up front. And the only way you get a return for the investment you make is if the property sells. With that level of risk, there's a certain amount of reward that you're entitled to. And then take them through all of the services and all of the investments that you make when you go to sell a house. So they understand that you're putting up all that money up front, you're putting all that effort up front with the idea or the intent that when it sells, there's a reasonable return for the effort and the investment that you make. Another technique I like, and it's always a little bit humorous, it's called the P45. Now the P45 is actually a car. It's the cheapest car in the world. If you've never seen one, it's basically an easy boy chair with 4 wheels on it. Now this technique works really well when your client drives a very nice car. For instance, let's pretend just for a second you're at the client's house and they ask you, "Will you cut your commission?" And you say, "No. Do you have any more questions?" And they're a little more adamant with you than that. They really stay after it. And you say, "Well, let me just ask you this, Mr. Seller. I noticed when I drove in the driveway, you drove a BMW. It's a nice car. Let me ask you, why do you drive a BMW?" And the client responds with, "It's the ultimate driving machine." And I say, "Yes, it is. But if we go beyond the tagline, do you feel safe in that car?" And he says, "Yes." "Do you feel secure in that car?" And he says, "Yes." "Do you feel like you can trust that car?" And he says, "Yes." "Do you like the quality of the car?" And he says, "Yes." "Where are you going with this?" And I say, "Well, why don't you drive a P45? And he looks at me and he says, "What's a P45? And I say, "It's the absolute cheapest car in the world. It does exactly the same thing as your BMW does. It moves you from point A to point B. But I believe, you believe, that it's not just the destination, it's the journey." You see, if that other agent's a P45 and I'm a BMW, I think your decision's straightforward. Wouldn't you agree? Now, another one I like is something called mutual lowering. Let's pretend for a sec your business model is 6%. And the client wants you to reduce your commission by 1%. Down to 5%. 1% on the surface doesn't sound like a lot, but what you probably are not aware of, a 1% commission from 6 to 5 is the equivalent reduction of 15% of your income, 15% reduction. So when the client says to you, "Will you reduce your commission from 6 to 5, say no. And if they stay after you, say, "Well, let me share something with you. If I was to reduce my commission from 6 to 5%, that would be a 15% reduction in my overall revenue on this particular sale. So I would consider reducing my revenue by 15%, or as you said, from 6 to 5, if you would be willing to reduce the asking price of your house by 15%. That way I wouldn't have to work very hard and it would sell really quickly." No, me either. Now, another way of looking at this, when somebody's going after your commission, you might want to talk about a mutual increase. For instance, after you've gone through all your services and they're adamant about, say, 5% instead of 6%, what I might do in a case like that is say, "Well, let me ask you this. What if there was a way that we could get you everything that you were looking for and it didn't cost you anything in terms of the net sale price of your property, would you still be interested, as long as you walked away with what you had hoped you'd walk away with, would you still be interested in hearing what I have to say? Well, I'd rather see us increase the asking price of your house by 1% and leave me with the revenue that I need to offset the services that we're going to use to attract the right buyers. So I wouldn't take this one out of your pocket right from the get-go, but if you need a fallback position, this will be a way for you to maintain your commission, keep everything in line, maintain your consistency with everything you do, still be offering the services that you're looking for, and at the end of the day, your ability to net what you were looking for and not reduce your commissions. Now, commission breakdown is cute. You're sitting with a client, they say, will you reduce your commission from 6 to 5? And you say, no, and they stay after you. And you say, well, let me show you something. So take out a piece of paper, and with that piece of paper, say, let's pretend this is a 6% commission. When the property sells, half the commission goes to the agent that sells it. That leaves me with 1/2. Half of that commission, or 1% of that commission goes to, or out of the 3%, 1% goes to my broker. This leaves me with 2%. 1% I use for selling your house, marketing strategies, activities, and attracting all the right buyers, and this leaves me with 1%. Government carves off a piece of that, so actually I'm down to about 0.75 of 1%. And you want me to reduce my commission by a full 1%? This is what I use to feed, house, and clothe my family, and you want it? I don't think so. Do we have any more questions? Now, that's a little crass, and it usually makes the agents who are watching this smile and maybe even laugh a little bit. What I'd rather see you do is take out six $1 bills or 6 loonies if you're in Canada and put them on the table. And move 3 of them off to one side when you talk about the buyer's agent selling the property and leaving you with 3. Take one of those and move it over and say, this is what my broker gets. And take the other one and say, this 1% here is what I use to market your home, all your advertising and marketing strategies and e-strategies and direct mail, and talk to them about that. And then show them the last piece that's left. And let them know this is what you use for your personal profit. This is how you feed, house, and clothe your family. And when they understand how the commission dollars how they break down, they're less likely to push you. I've used this technique very successfully a number of times. And I don't want to sound sexist, but more than once, the wife stopped the husband right in mid-sentence and said, stop. He's barely making enough money now as it is. Yes, we'll take your 6% commission. So be able to demonstrate how the commission breaks down, and you're going to find that that's going to give the client a better understanding of where the dollars go. Now, buyer representative bonus. When you take a look at the MLS system, and you have to be very careful in terms of the wording on this particular technique. But if the client wants you to cut your commission, what I would do is draw 4 houses on a piece of property. And I would say, let's play real estate, Mr. Seller. Let's pretend for a second you were a real estate agent. And this property, for instance, is listed at 2.5 to the agent that sells it, and this one's listed at 2.5, and this one's listed at 2.5, and this one's listed at 2. The client's after you for a 4% commission. Now, what I do with this particular situation is I say, if you were out showing houses on the weekend and you were a real estate agent, and you had to pick 3 out of 4 houses to show, which one wouldn't you show? And he says, well, I wouldn't show the 2%. And I say, well, based on your strategy and the way you think, you wouldn't even sell your own house. So from that perspective, doesn't it make sense to at least give me a level playing field? Now, there is one other technique that I would use with that particular strategy, or one other set of dialogues, and what I would do is I would put the number there instead of 2.5, 3.5. And then I'd go a step further and I would say to him, if you were a salesperson and you wanted to try to sell somebody a house in this price category, assuming they were all pretty similar, and this one's paying 3.5 to the agent that sells it, which one would attract more of your attention? And he said, well, the 3.5. I say, well, based on that philosophy, then we should put a bonus in to the agent that sells the property. We shouldn't be talking about 6%. We might need to look at 7%. Now, the recipe close isn't something I would normally use, but one of my salespeople in one of my classes uses it very successfully. She loves to bake, and she takes out a chocolate recipe, and she puts it on the kitchen table when the client's asking her to cut commission. And she says, I want to show you something. And when I do, I think you'll have a better understanding of why it's important that we have full fees for selling your property. Now, here is a recipe for the perfect chocolate cake. And if we were to go through, for instance, you'll notice that there are certain ingredients in certain amounts in a certain sequence will guarantee the perfect outcome. This is a great recipe. Cake is always perfect, she says. But if we were to go through and change some of the recipe, some of the ingredients or some of the amounts, we're going to change the outcome. Would you agree with that? The client says yes. Say, well, let me show you something. Let's pretend for a second we removed baking powder. Would the cake cook? And usually the client says no, and she responds with, well, it would cook, it just wouldn't rise. Could we put icing on it? And they say yes, and she says, would it appear to look kind of like a cake? And they say yes, and if you'd had a bite of it, would you be happy with it? And they say no. And she says, exactly. When it comes to selling real estate, there is a formula, a recipe, certain ingredients in a certain order or sequence in the right amount guarantees a successful outcome. Now, if we start reducing the recipe or changing the formula, we're going to change the outcome. I'm not saying the house won't sell. I'm just saying you're not going to be happy when you get to closing. Now, often when I travel, I find that there are salespeople out there that are using a menu of services. I'm not a fan of this particular technique. There's the bronze plan at this price, and the silver plan at this price, and the gold plan at that price, and maybe even a platinum program at another pricing structure. But typically what happens is when the salespeople take the clients through these different plans, the clients zero in on the bronze plan, and they want all of the activities and strategies that go with the platinum program. So ultimately, the salesperson ends up doing what they should be doing from a full service perspective, but putting it out at a discount price. So I'm not very fond of this particular strategy. In fact, if you were going to use this strategy, say a bronze, silver, and gold plan, what I might have is a commission structure of 6, 7, and 8, not 4, 5, and 6. That way, if somebody does choose something, they're going to choose at least the commission rate you want or even more. Now, when you get to the client's house, and you got to know that they've had some dialogue before you've arrived, and they've talked to each other, and they said, we're not signing anything, or we're not paying full commission, and they've had this conversation between the husband and wife, for instance. When you ring the doorbell, it wouldn't be unusual for the client to say within that first 10 seconds as you're walking in the front door, I want to be clear right up front with you, I'm not paying 6%. Now, how do you handle that? Do you immediately jump into some sort of commission dialogues? And I'd say no. You know, a person really never understands truly what they're paying for until they understand the services that you're supplying. So what you do in a case like this, if a person gets you right at the door and says, I'm not paying 6%, you say, no problem. I don't think either of us should make a decision about something as important as your house and base it purely on commission. I'll tell you what, I'll agree to work for whatever we can agree on, but let's not make that decision until I at least see what you have and you see what I have. Fair enough? And then that's called the set it aside technique. You just set it aside. As you get through the whole presentation, you take them through all your strategies, you show them everything that you do, they really get a sense that you're better and different than every other salesperson in the marketplace. And at that point, commissions become less of a challenge. Now, I'd rather take a few minutes and explain to somebody why I charge them 6% than spend the rest of my life apologizing for not charging them enough. When you take them through your full service plan and they understand clearly what they're getting for the commission dollars that they're spending, and understand clearly if you were to adopt a commission structure that was less than your typical structure, the only way you would be able to do that is to start to go through your list of services and start removing services from the list. And if you did that, ultimately you would affect the sale price, affect the amount of traffic, and affect how happy the client would be with you. So I'd rather take a few minutes and explain to you why I charge 6% than spend the rest of my life apologizing to you for charging only 5%. Now, pay as you go. I've seen this used successfully once or twice throughout my career. Client wants you to cut your commission. Salesperson says, you know, I'll consider reducing my commission from 6 to 5 if you would be willing to giving me a marketing retainer right up front. A marketing retainer, what's that? Well, there are certain costs associated with selling your house. Advertising, photography, videography, that sort of thing. And to make sure that we attract all of the right buyers, this strategy is very important to you and it's very important to me. If you want me to reduce my fees, then you'd have to assume the costs associated with the marketing of the house. And to get the file opened and to get things started, I'm going to need a retainer. Could we maybe open up that account with a $2,000 retainer, and at the end of each month I'll reconcile that account, let you know how much money we've spent on the marketing strategies, and after a month or so I'll be back to you to get you to top that account up. 99 times out of 100, the idea of taking out their checkbook and writing you a check for $2,000 doesn't go over very well. Once they understand how much money you need to invest and you can be clear about that, then they'll have a better appreciation of why they need to pay you a full fee, 6 or even in some cases 7%. So pay as you go. Now I have one caveat with this. If you were to use this strategy and the client did agree to give you a check, that check, everywhere you go, must be made out to your broker. Remember, you can't receive money from the public. The money needs to go to your broker, and yes, you would have to reconcile that account as a form of good accounting to make sure that your client's kept up to date. But let me just say this to you. The likelihood of somebody giving you a check up front to covering the marketing expenses is probably not going to happen. It really just substantiates the fact that you've got to go in your pocket up front and make these type of investments. Now, I'm a huge fan for this particular technique, and it's a very simple one, and it's one that everybody can do. Instead of getting all wobbly when somebody asks you what commission rate you charge or hesitating when it's time to fill in the listing agreement, I'd recommend as a regular course of action before you leave the office on any appointment that you fill in your commission rate in the listing agreement before you go. How do you get 6%? You put it in the listing agreement before you go. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, he's dreaming in Technicolor. I haven't had a 6% commission in 2 years. Well, the reason you haven't had a 6% commission in 2 years is because you haven't asked for it. In life, you get what you ask for. So if you want 6 and you believe you're worth 6, then put 6 in the listing agreement right up front and develop the skills so that you can demonstrate to the seller why you charge the fee structure you do. Always build a program that's exceptional, better than everybody else in the marketplace. And you didn't get in this business to be average, and if your model's average, the only thing you have left to compete on are your commission dollars. So you have to constantly work at building a better experience for the consumers that you represent. Now, appeal to their morals. Let's pretend you've done the whole listing agreement. You've gone through the whole evening, done your presentation, all of that, and it's at the end of the evening. And the client says, will you cut your commission? And how I might handle this situation is using this particular technique where I would look at them and say, you know, we've spent the last 2 hours together, gotten along well, and I've certainly enjoyed your company, and you have a great house. But if I agreed at this point to cut my commission, that would be as if I spent the last 2 hours lying to you. And I don't lie about anything. In fact, I think that would be a terrible way for us to start our business relationship based on a lie. Wouldn't you agree? And then you got to put those puppy dog eyes on. Understand clearly that if I could have done it at 5, I would have taken it at 5 and I would have told you 5. But my program is 6, and my program is founded and based on all of the strategies and activities, the effort, the energy, the attention to detail, and the discipline I bring to everything. So it's really about what I'm doing. And if you see value in what I'm doing, you'll understand why I charge 6. Remember, if you want 6, ask for 6, and be prepared to prove to the client you're worth 6. Slippery slope. I understand you'd like me to cut my commission. Now, I love this particular technique because it really says a lot about your integrity. And integrity and trust are one of the key components based on what somebody will use as a factor to choose the agent or to represent them in the marketplace. Think about this. How would somebody feel if they were to contract the services of somebody in terms of selling their house, but they couldn't trust them? That to me would leave me with a very uncomfortable feeling because it's a huge investment. It's the largest asset they own. And what if they end up tangled up in a situation where the agent hasn't represented them properly, they haven't done a good job, and they're left in a very precarious position with potential liability issues? So trust is huge when it comes to choosing a real estate agent. This is a great technique because it also says, it underlines a whole lot of other things going on at that table that evening. Integrity, trust, dependability, these are all factors that the homeowner wants when they're choosing a salesperson. So in this particular technique, I'd say something along the lines, if I agreed to cut my commission, that would offend the neighbors, your neighbors who I've done business with. Let's look at it from your side of the table, Mr. Seller. Let's pretend tonight that you agree to hire me to be your salesperson, and we come to terms on my full fee, full service program. How would you feel if a couple of weeks from now you were talking to one of your neighbors or friends and you actually found out that I listed their house and gave them that full program, but I did it at a reduced fee? You'd feel like you got taken advantage of. And that's no way for anybody who works with me to feel. At the end of the day, you need to feel good about the relationship we have, and you need to trust when I tell you something, you can count on it and take it to the bank. This is a huge decision on your part. Choosing the right agent can make a difference in literally thousands of dollars to your bottom line. And you can't afford to work with somebody you can't trust. Wouldn't you agree? And that's how I would finish up that one.